Welcome, everyone. I'm Gabriella Gallagher, the National Chair of Canadian Friends of Peace Now. Our organization is the Canadian partner to Peace Now, Shalom Achav, which is Israel's leading peace movement and which promotes the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You can find out more about us on our website, peacenowcanada.org. We really hope you will consider supporting us with a donation, which you can do via the donate page on our website. We rely entirely on donations from people like you. Later on, we will have time for audience questions. Please type your questions at any time using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Please make your questions as concise as you can. Our webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website. Our host today is my colleague, Reuven Schultz, the chair of the Montreal chapter of Canadian Friends of Peace Now. And now it is my great honor to introduce our special guest, Nimrod Novik. Nimrod has a very broad and deep understanding of Middle East issues. He has served as a policy advisor to former Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres, as a special ambassador of the State of Israel, and as an advisor to the Israeli National Security Council. He is the Israeli Fellow of the Israel Policy Forum and a senior associate for the Economic Cooperation Foundation. And he is also on the leadership of the Commanders for Israel's Security. This group comprises 550 retired generals and equivalents from the IDF, Mossad, Shin Bet, and Diplomatic Corps, all dedicated to resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Thank you so much, Nimrod, for being with us today. And now I'll hand things over to Reuven, who will get our discussion rolling with some pertinent questions.
Good morning, Nimrod.
Good evening to you.
Oh, good evening. The anxiously awaited hostage release ceasefire is coming to fruition as we speak. Before we dig into the other issues, tell us about how the deal is being received. What is the current mood in Israel?
Well, Reuven, with your permission, first a personal note on this moment. Literally, as we speak, the first three hostages, young female, are in Israeli hands, meeting with their mothers after 471 days in captivity. That's in itself is a moment we've been waiting for far too long. But there is another dimension, if I may, beyond the national. There is a personal dimension because my eldest grandson serves in the security detail of this transfer from Hamas hands to Red Cross, to IDF, to mom and dad. The ceasefire could not have come any later for us with our grandson, in Gaza. There was no day and no night. And the weight is so heavy. The worry is so heavy, and the need to keep a brave face in front of him so as not to demoralize him was quite a trick. But with the ceasefire, and now that he has the privilege of securing the return home of the hostages, that's, of course, a moment that neither he nor us will ever forget. The country did hold its breath in the last few hours. As always, in such circumstances with Hamas, there were hiccups and the schedule was not kept. Even the formal ceasefire was delayed earlier today, was supposed to start at 8:15 in the morning. Hamas violated the agreement by not submitting the names of the three on time. Israel retaliated by bombing certain targets in Gaza, and the fear that the whole thing is collapsing was really making it very difficult to breathe. But that was overcome, and phase one of three of the deal that was struck is on its way. And there are thousands and thousands of people gathered in Tel Aviv to celebrate the moment. People who have been in the streets week after week after week after week since they were kidnapped, and are going to be there until the last hostage is back home. So there is a moment of euphoria and happiness for the three. There's great worry about the remainder 30 of the first phase, and even more so about the others, the other 60 some, before all hostages are back home.
The ceasefire looks very precarious. What will it take for the ceasefire to hold? And what are the fault lines that threaten it?
I would say that barring some Deus ex machina, phase one is likely to proceed more or less on schedule and based on the principles that were agreed to, because both sides have a vested interest in the success of phase one. Hamas need the reprise. This is their moment of coming out with the ceasefire, coming out of the bunkers and the tunnels, and showing their faces and claiming victory by virtue of having survived. The pressure here not to violate the ceasefire in order to allow all 33 of the hostages of phase one to come home. And then there is a big surprise, which is the incoming Uncle Sam, who turned out to be far more involved in the issue than anybody could have anticipated. Before taking the oath of office, I've been following American administrations and transitions from one administration to another for many, many decades. I don't recall any precedent where the incoming was actively conducting policy, diplomacy, negotiations, applying pressure, as it has been over the last few weeks, with the administration's envoy, Steve Witkoff, joining hands with the Biden team in a exemplary demonstration of coordination between two, basically hostile administrations, on a cause that is so dear to us. So that was a great surprise, and we keep hearing from the president-elect and his environment, mostly messages saying, you better stick with it. The same language that he used, get it done, is now used in stick with it. So I think that the combination of the needs of the two parties and the American supervision, and the very fact that Witkoff intends to relocate, so to speak, to Cairo and oversee this close by, suggests that prospects of success of phase one are not bad.
Netanyahu has dragged his feet on ending the Gaza war. The extremists in his coalition have aggressively agitated against the ceasefire. Will Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich continue to yield undue influence over Gaza? Has Netanyahu a firmer grip on power today than he had a few months ago when his popularity fell to historic lows?
You know, in a memo that I published under the title within a project of that we called the Critical Neighbours of IPF, of Israel Policy Forum, we had a recently one. The Critical Neighbours concept is that Egypt, Jordan, the Palestinians in Israel are the critical neighbors that sometimes are overlooked. Egypt and Jordan are sometimes overlooked when everybody is focused on the Abraham Accord signatories or the drama and tragedy on the Palestinian arena. So we did a project on that brings to the IPF audience 4 perspectives on what's going on: Egyptian, Jordanian, Israeli, and Palestinian. And the most recent was how does these 4 players view the incoming Trump administration? And one thing that I wrote in that memo was that the Gaza deal is a tug of war between Smotrich and Trump, which is bizarre, ironic, and unacceptable. But that's the reality. Who does Netanyahu fear more? Smotrich that can bring him down, or Trump, who is the superpower, the incoming superpower? I didn't make a predictions in it, but my inclination is that he fears Smotrich more, and that we wouldn't have had the agreement that we are now witnessing implemented had he not succeeded in convincing Smotrich not to jump ship. Ben-Gvir did. Ben-Gvir voted against, and not only voted against, but left the government in protest, but declaring that he'll be back the morning that the war resumes. Smotrich made the flip side of that commitment. I will leave the government if by the end of phase 1, which is 42 days, the war is not resumed. Which means that in 42 days, if the war does not resume and they live up to their commitments, Ben-Gvir stays out, Smotrich leaves, and Netanyahu has no coalition. And early elections are in the cards unless he does an interesting political move, changes direction completely, and brings in the moderates to replace the extremists, which is a possibility. So yeah, by virtue of staying and not bringing the government down, Smotrich will continue to wield power primarily on his life mission, which is destroying the possibility of a 2-state solution by conducting a very aggressive policy on the West Bank.
Gadi Eisenkot, a former commander and chief of the IDF and a former member of Netanyahu's security cabinet, said that the deal could have been ready in May. He said that Biden said it was ready in May. Netanyahu supporters reject this. Does this division of opinion mark the outlines of a political future that is likely to emerge out of this crisis?
Let me first set the record straight on May. President Biden was scheduled to make a major speech to the region, and primarily to Israelis, on the 31st of May. And that speech was supposed to create a moment of clarity for the Israeli public. Basically laying out the 2 options available for Israel. One option is the one Israel was sliding and still is, which is awful, which is an open-ended occupation of Gaza, with the West Bank sliding in a Gaza direction, with all the peace partners, near and far, Abraham Accord signatories included, forced to distance themselves from us, international isolation, delegitimization, the whole thing is one option. And the other was the so-called Biden initiative, which says, end the war in Gaza, bring back the hostages, bring into Gaza a third party comprising primarily of 5 Arab countries that have volunteered to do so, provided that they are legitimized by the Palestinian authorities' involvement, and provided this is done in the context of a commitment, a credible commitment to a path leading toward a two-state solution. And the speech was basically to say, you know, Israelis, you're all grown-ups, you all had your bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah, and you make your own decisions, but here are the 2 options in front of you. 4 days before the speech, on the 27th of May, Netanyahu sent Biden, and through the mediators, the Egyptians and the Qataris, sent Hamas a formula for ending the war, bringing the hostages, and changing dynamics all around. Receiving that formula, President Biden decided that rather than deliver his moment of a moment of truth speech, he will deliver the Bibi plan speech in order to nail Netanyahu to his own plan. And on the 31st of March, he did that. On the 10th of June, the UN Security Council endorsed that plan. The mediators stalled Hamas on the notion that the UN Security Council, having with no objection, 14-4, and the Russians just abstained, that was an answer to Hamas' demand for guarantees, for international guarantees to the Israeli commitments. So here you have the most powerful guarantee, 14-0 opposed. Here is your guarantee. On the 2nd of June, this was on the 10th of June. On the 2nd of July, Hamas conveyed its acceptance of the plan. Once that happened, Netanyahu discovered that we cannot survive without the Philadelphia corridor and the Netzarim corridor, and he issued a memo to the Americans and the mediators that clarifies, he called it, his original plan of the 27th of May, but basically got everything stuck until about 10 days ago. His original May 27th plan was resurrected, negotiated, agreed upon, and is being implemented as we speak. So yes, Gadi Eisenkot, who was there in the cabinet and witnessed Netanyahu making the offer that we are now executing. And in the interim, how many hostages died? How many Israeli soldiers were killed? And how many thousands of Palestinian, innocent Palestinians, were killed as well in more than 6 months of dragging the war way beyond its purposeful phase. Let me just say one word so I'm clear about it. The war that we launched in the wake of October 7th was the most justified one can think of. And it had objectives that were realistic, which is undo Hamas governance and dismantle Hamas military capabilities. These 2 objectives were accomplished in March or April. We are in January, way beyond the purposeful phase of the war. Hamas is to blame for much of it, but as an Israeli, I have no expectations of a terror organization. But I have every expectation of my government. And when my government was dragging its feet and members of the cabinet testified to it, but you know what? You don't really need Eisenkot. Ben-Gvir has been bragging over the past week that he blocked any ceasefire by threatening Netanyahu to bring down his coalition.
Where does public opinion stand? Would rather people believe Netanyahu, or would they believe his opponents?
Look, Netanyahu, to his credit, dominated Israeli politics for as long as many young Israelis are alive. They don't remember a prime minister other than he, with a brief pause of a year and a half of Bennett and Lapid. It was no exaggeration when people were talking about the Netanyahu magic. But that magic is gone. His ability, his unique capacity at verbal acrobatics, at marketing his things, at misleading the public, all that evaporated in 3 phases. Phase 1 was 23, when he launched the judicial coup against the Supreme Court and the judicial system, and more than 65% of the public was opposed to it on a consistent basis. Not a public opinion poll here and there, but consistently. Now, 65% is not the Israeli left. I wish the Israeli left was 65% of the electorate. It is not. 65% meant it bites deep, not just the entire center, but also deep into the right. People were against it. The second, of course, was October 7th, where Mr. Security failed so miserable, and suddenly his entire strategy of the preceding decade was exposed for being based on false assumptions. A bad strategy of feeding the beast of the Islamist extremists while undermining the moderates in the Palestinian Authority. And that was the strategy. It was a declared strategy. It was not, something we deducted. So it was exposed on October 7th. And in the ensuing month was phase 3 of where he lost segments of his own electorate, was the fact that the government didn't exist. The government was MIA, and suddenly people realized that when you appoint cronies for ministerial position and sub-ministerial positions, that the ministries do not function. There are consequences to doing that. The incompetent on the basis of loyalty. And as a result, his party lost something like a third of its support. His coalition no longer comes even close to the majority required. So the Israeli public, and on the issue of hostages, ceasefire, ending the war, the Israeli public was divided, but not the classic 50-50. It was something like 70-30 or 65-25 and 10 don't know. That was the ratio of support for ending the war in order to bring the hostages and in order to end the war. What most Israelis are not aware of is that his continued resistance of any role for the Palestinian Authority in Gaza rules out the entry of a third party. And if the IDF withdraws as planned, it leaves a vacuum for Hamas to come back.
Well, like circling back to what you were saying about the tension between Smotrich and Trump that Netanyahu feels, is Saudi Crown Prince and Prime Minister Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud a most valuable business partner of Donald Trump's, has insisted that post-war horizon must include a two-state solution to avoid instability in his kingdom and the region. On the other hand, the Likud, its coalition partners, and Trump mega donors such as Miriam Adelson and the evangelists are intent on annexation of the West Bank and Gaza. There is a conflict of interest between supporters of Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. How is this tension likely to be resolved?
You know, the only upside of October of the awful, brutal October 7th, the only upside that I have managed to identify was that the two-state solution was transformed from lip service to policy directive in many capitals, including Washington. I mean, you look at the Biden administration initial 3 years, there was a lot of lip service to two-state solution and no action whatsoever. And the same goes for the Saudis. When normalization was negotiated in earnest prior to October 7th, all they needed was lip service on the two-state solution, Palestinian rights, Palestinian self-determination, and so on. With October 7th and the reaction of their public to the ensuing war and the awful images from Gaza, that is no longer the case. Now the Saudis, in order to go for normalization, need something more substantial. They even look at their neighbor, the United Arab Emirates, that did normalization on the face of it, in return for Israel with dropping the intent of annexation in the West Bank. That was the deal at the time. And Mohammed bin Salman is looking at his neighbor, Mohammed bin Zayed, and say, look how the Israelis fooled him. They committed to no annexation. So they didn't convene the Knesset to vote annexation in a blunt and visible way, but annexation went from creeping to galloping in practice on the West Bank. So with Saudi Arabia considering itself, and for very good reasons, as the center of the Arab and Muslim world, the ruler, the crown prince, believes that he must get more from the Israelis than the Emiratis did, and he will not allow himself to do normalization and wake up the morning after to find out that all commitments have been violated. So yeah, they insist on a lot more. And as you said, the current coalition will not tolerate any of this. So as long as Netanyahu sticks with his most extreme partners, with the partners he chose, the Jewish supremacists, the messianic annexationists, as long as he sticks with them, it's not going to happen. There is a school of thought in Israel that believes that he is approaching the moment where he realizes that the deal that he made with the extremists is not working. I mean, basically, the original deal that brought about his government had a formula whereby he allows each one of the coalition partner to pursue its whims. The annexationists to go for annexation, the Jewish supremacists to show Israeli Arab citizens who's the boss, to establish Israeli supremacy on Temple Mount, no matter what it does to 2 billion Muslims the world over, allowing the ultra-Orthodox both an exemption, a legislated exemption from military service, and funding for the school that perpetuate ignorance, all that in return for them legislating his way out of his legal predicament. Hence, the judicial coup of early 23. But that was blocked by massive protest and eventually by the war. They try to resume it now, but it's not working. Now, if he reaches the conclusion that he takes the risk that the trial reaches its logical conclusion, which is prison time, and he knows that better than I do, because he knows what the prosecution has, he might go for an alternative strategy of trying to expunge his legacy, not leave it just October 7th being his legacy, but Saudi Arabia normalization, somewhat neutralizing some of the effect. And in order to get there, he has to do a 180-degree turn on the entire national agenda, including the Palestinian issue, in order to tempt the moderates, Gantz, Lapid, Gadi Eisenkot, and maybe even Lieberman, to replace the lunatics and still provide him with a coalition. Some people say that this is just over the horizon, and that the Trump factor, insisting, and since Trump is committed to expanding the Abraham Accords into including Israeli-Saudi normalization, and as we all know, Saudi Arabia will not be alone. There are other countries waiting for the Saudi stamp of kosher in order to do the same, and not just Arab countries, but also non-Arab Muslim countries. So who knows? If we're lucky and the stars are aligned, out of this awful year and a half, we may yet see some light.
Well, I heard that this morning that even the Arab parties would support Netanyahu if his coalition would fall apart if he continues with the ceasefire agreement. And I want to know, where is the Democratic Party of Israel, Yesh Atid, the Arab parties, and Amdim B'Yachad? What are their prospects politically these days? Are there hidden sources of support in the Israeli public for politics of normalization with Israel's neighbors?
Let's start with the fact that it's not hidden. I mean, this country is sucker for polls. So we're having more than one a week. And that gives you a pool that neutralizes a bad pollster who doesn't know how to sample, or one who is skewing it for political reasons. When you have such a huge pool, you can see trends. And the trends are very, very clear. The trends are that the current opposition has a majority, and the current coalition, which now in the Knesset is 64, 68, depends how you count Gideon Sa'ar, in every poll is hovering around 50 when you need 61 for majority. They are hovering above and beneath, depends what week and circumstances. They will probably get a boost of 2 or 3 from the hostages release. But still, the basic trend is that the current coalition has no majority, where elections held today and all else remaining equal. So there is a considerable confidence among the opposition that where elections held, they will form the next government. But in my conversations, and of course it's not binding on anybody, in my conversation with the leaders of the opposition, they give a lot of thought and prepare for the moment that Netanyahu calls them into the room and makes them an offer they cannot refuse. An offer of, as I said, 180 across the board. No more judicial coup, no threats on firing the gatekeepers of the Israeli democracy. a change, of course, on the Palestinian issue, in order to get also the broader regional integration, coalition vis-a-vis Iran, with Saudi Arabia as the crown jewel. Now, a word of caution. Even if tomorrow morning we had an alternative coalition, our dream coalition from the current players, you're not going to see the new leadership rushing to Ramallah to hug Abu Mazen and sign a peace treaty. The two peoples are too traumatized by the experience of the last year and a quarter. And what was difficult before October 7th is even more difficult now. What you are likely to see is a change of course, gradual, security-based, but very serious change of course, which stops the slide towards a ever-conflicted and bleeding one-state reality and start the slide in the other direction. The menu of steps that can bring us to that objective is known to all of them, is acceptable to all of them. It's not that dramatic. You don't have to divide Jerusalem on day one. You're talking about steps that will have very broad public support. But, you know, we keep saying public support and we keep saying public opinion polls. But in the end, the ones who call the shots are leaders. Do they rise to the occasion or do they not?
Gabriella, I understand we have a question from the audience. Gabriella? Oh, well, I'll ask a question.
Yes, no, I'm here. Thanks. Sorry about that. Yeah, we do have a couple of audience questions, and I remind the audience to go ahead and put their questions in the Q&A. I'll start with Barbara Landau's second question first. So I think it's particularly. So what is the prospect of free and fair elections in the West Bank? What is the chance of Barghouti being a candidate? And maybe you could stick on to that. What is the state of the PA now in terms of their ability to lead?
I'll start with the end.
Okay.
The PA is totally discredited. It enjoys no public support. I mean, that's even putting it mildly. 80% of the Palestinian public wants it gone. It is corrupt. Nepotism is widespread. And it has failed on the two justifications for its very existence. One is providing services to its people, and the other one is bringing self-determination, independence, statehood. Now, I don't absolve the Palestinian leadership of responsibility for the miserable state of the Palestinian Authority, but obviously much more of the blame is in Jerusalem, not in Ramallah. For decades, Israeli policy was to weaken the Palestinian Authority, to discredit the Palestinian Authority in front of its own people. And it's not just this game of strengthening the extremists and weakening, it's not just strengthening Hamas that weakened the Palestinian Authority, which it did, but it was a deliberate policy of weakening the Palestinian Authority. I'll just illustrate it with one example. The Palestinian security forces. They have been cooperating with the Israeli security forces since the end of the Second Intifada in a very efficient way. Our Shin Bet and IDF credit the Palestinian security forces with saving scores of Israeli lives, both indirectly by swathing all kinds of terror activities, and directly by saving Israelis who risk their lives in stupid driving into areas where they're not supposed to drive at a time of high tension between the two peoples. The Palestinian security forces, who are trained by an international group called, it's under the name of USSC, United States Security Coordinator, but has a very important Canadian element there. They've been trained by them. They oversaw their equipment, and they play a role in coordinating between them and the Israeli security agencies. When they first showed up on the Palestinian streets, they were, to the Palestinian public, they were admired. They were being saluted on the street. They were the embodiment of a state in being. And they had such good training on the one hand and self-respect on the other, that they seem to be, by and large, a rare commodity in the Arab world, where security forces are uncorruptible on the Palestinian street. You can't buy your way out of a ticket, driving ticket or something violation, by giving him a 50 shekel bill. They had pride in themselves, and they were the pride and joy of the Palestinian people. Today, they are traitors. When they were cooperating with us, when there was a political horizon, they were serving the Palestinian national aspiration. When they cooperate with us, when there is no political horizon, they're serving the occupation. They're subcontractors of the occupation. So just to illustrate how our policy of depriving Palestinians of hope undermines even the most precious achievement of Oslo, which is the Palestinian security agencies and their coordination with ours. Abu Mazen, it breaks my heart, because we really were close friends. I'm talking about personal friends. I mean, there are pictures here of him in my home for dinner. My wife accompanied his wife when she was hospitalized in Israel. We were very, very close, and he was a man of peace through and through. He still is, but he became a different person on areas that affect his effectiveness. He allowed corruption all around, including in his own family, which obviously undermined public support for the PA. He became authoritarian. Anybody who challenged him was removed, either from the PA and its agencies, or from the West Bank altogether, exiled, like Muhammad Dakhlan, who is now in Abu Dhabi. He dismissed from his vicinity any thoughtful person and remained with a yes man who just tell him what he wants to hear. He's in a bubble, disconnected with the population. In 2021, he declared elections. That was a moment of joy on the Palestinian street, and the young generation was so mobilized and so energized. This is our moment. 34 lists were running in the elections, most of them young people who never had a say about their future previously, and were eager and capable people. And then he called it off because he feared that he's going to lose, and he called it off. So he is in his 16th year of a 4-year term, and he doesn't seem to entertain the idea of early elections, anytime soon. But on the other hand, nobody lives forever, and nobody stays in office forever. So maybe he's tired. He's not up to, he's comfortable with the status quo. So if a new challenge comes, a very serious challenge of changing dynamics, of the PA taking over Gaza because Israel came to its senses, of the Saudis and others taking upon themselves to chaperone Palestinian reforms, as Biden has suggested and they had agreed. If something like this happens, and he is 88, 89, he may decide to retire to his property in Qatar, and a new chapter will be opened on the Palestinian political horizon.
Thank you for that very interesting and detailed response. So we have another question from Jacqueline Swartz, and she would like to know what it will take, and we're still on the West Bank here, what it will take to stop the violence against Palestinians on the West Bank. I presume she's referring to settler violence against them, perhaps also IDF raids. Okay. And yeah, and there's also, of course, as you say, galloping annexation.
Look, everything but everything is stuck in Jerusalem. We can bitch from here to eternity about the quality of Palestinian leadership, about the vicious brutality, extremism of Hamas. But we are by far the strongest player, and with strength comes responsibility. We are the strongest with no comparison to the Palestinians, but we are the strongest country within 1,500 miles in any direction from Jerusalem. And we should start behaving with the kind of confidence that should come with strength and a willingness to take the risks of doing instead of the risks associated with not doing. We've had settler violence against Palestinian civilians before the current coalition that was formed in January 23. But with their leaders, with this most extreme segment of the settlers movement, with their leaders in government, the backwind that provided to settler violence peaked in ways that nobody could have anticipated. Where we have dozens of incidents a day, and when I say a day, I mean day and night, all over the West Bank. It will not change without a change of policy, and there will be no change of policy without a change of government.
Okay, thank you so much. A question from John Snipper. Do you have a sense of where the Gazans, both Gazans and West Bank Palestinians now stand on acceptance of Israel? I guess there's maybe two different answers there. And says, do you think this war may have finally convinced the Palestinian street that it has to accept the continued existence of a Jewish state?
Not in the short term. And I don't think they frame it that way. I don't think that either on the West Bank or in Gaza, the majority, even the young who are more militant, even the young, I don't think they frame it as there are prospects of undoing Israel in their lifetime. I think that if Israel lost some, not if, as Israel lost some of its deterrence on October 7th, it was more than restored in the last few months with demonstration of our capabilities, technological and kinetic, in Lebanon, vis-a-vis Hezbollah, in Syria, and in Iran itself. So I don't think that they entertain the illusion that their fight can bring Israel down. But I think what we see is a trend that we have known previously, which is when there is hope, the majority slides in the direction of supporting hope. When there is no hope, the majority slides in the direction of supporting violence. And I'll start with the West Bank. I don't think it is an accident. It's a very sad non-accident that Hamas became so popular on the West Bank. Not because, again, this is my reading of the Khalil Shkaki and other pollsters, Palestinian pollsters. This is my reading, and I may be wrong. Not because they endorsed the atrocities of October 7th, but because they feel that Hamas is the only one who's doing something against the occupation. Whereas the PA, as I said before, is a subcontractor of the occupation, makes the occupation easier on Israel by conducting all the services and so on. Hamas is fighting. So yeah, we don't like what they did, and raping and killing and burning and all that, and hostages is not our way, but they're doing something. And that's where Hamas became very popular on the West Bank. Mobilization, enlisting in terror organization among the young went up. And it's going to take a long time for that to subside, and it will not subside absent a credible political horizon. In Gaza, I think that we have just given birth to the next generation of terrorism. It is not just, and we heard it from Secretary Blinken, we heard it from the Israeli security agencies, different numbers, but the same concept, that Hamas has been recruiting more than we are killing, more operatives than we've been killing in the war in Gaza. That the young and even younger are motivated to enlist, and dismissing it just as, you know, they get 50 shekel and they go and kill a Jew is missing the point. Generation after generation of Gazans, kids see their parents humiliated, if not now killed, by the Israeli occupation, and that does not breed peace orientation. So the two communities in Gaza and the West Bank and the Israeli community are all traumatized, and it will take serious leadership to start turning the corner on more violence and more violence, and violence is the only remedy. It's not going to be easy. But just like I don't see a sea change in Israel as a result of October 7th to the effect that let's go for peace. I don't see that. I mean, it's my lesson. Okay? The illusion that at some point Palestinians will roll over and play dead and will accept to be deprived of citizenship and identity and dignity, because this is what we want, has been proven wrong time and time. First Intifada, Second Intifada, the wave of violence that we called the Intifada of the lone wolves, and now October 7th. There are going to be a lot more of those unless we change course. You don't see that as a broad sentiment in the Israeli public. Maybe the only upside, the only silver lining, which surprised me to positively surprised me, was the fact that our lunatics, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and their likes, did not gain anything out of October 7th in terms of public support. They were about 10-11% of the electorate on October 6th, and they are 10 and 11 or 11% of the electorate today. So that's good. I mean, 10-11% of lunatics is bad enough. But the very fact that the brutality of it did not create a wave of they are right means that we have a smart people here.
Okay, I think we have time for one more quick question, and then we'll have to wrap things up. Even though, as always, all the questions seem to come at the very end. But so this is something a little bit on a somewhat different topic, but and that is about the conscription of the Haredim. How might that affect the future of the current coalition? And yeah, go ahead and answer that.
Not my strong point. I mean, those issues are not really my area of expertise, but nonetheless, I'm both a citizen and a member of Commander for Israel Security that is focused on these issues as well. So I would say just the following. There are those who believe that circle cannot be squared, and that the Supreme Court decisions on this matter cannot be finessed, and therefore this will be the issue that will break the government. I don't belong to that school, even though I respect very much those who analyze that way. I believe that what we are going to see is either one of two outcomes. One, that they are able to find a formula that does finesse the issue without imposing what should be a comprehensive demand and penalties for those who violate national service. Either they finesse it, or this will be one of the triggers for the collapse of the coalition, where the issue of phase 2 on the hostage and ceasefire deal is going to be more weighty. So it adds to the friction within the coalition, and usually coalitions fall when frictions mount. It's rarely a single issue. There is a trigger always, but the trigger is never the cause. It's just a trigger. So we are seeing cumulative friction elements, which I think are likely to bring about early elections. But that's, you don't have to be a genius to expect early elections, because statistics is on your side. No government in the last 50 years completed its term. So statistics is on my side in saying we're going to have early elections. The question in my mind is only how much damage will the current coalition cause until it disappears from our political map.
Okay, so I just want to give you an opportunity to say some final words, if you wish, about what you think the way forward should be, could be, and then we'll have to wrap up. So,
I've been in this business of Israeli policy and national security for many, many decades. really starting at a very young age of in the 1970s. I don't remember a moment. When it comes to national security and policy, national policy, it is never a choice between a good and a bad option. It is always a choice between a very bad one and less so, an okay and a bad one. It is never 180 degrees, the perfect and the awful. We are at a moment that I have not experienced before, where the choice is between the perfect and the awful. The awful, I described it, is what we are sliding in right now. An open-ended occupation of Gaza, which is going to be bleeding, forever bleeding. We've been there. Arik Sharon took us out in 2005 out of Gaza for that reason. We've been there 18 years in Lebanon until Ehud Barak took us out of there in 2000 for that reason, bleeding for no good reason. You don't protect Israel by occupying a neighbor. You protect Israel by being very, very strong from within your own boundaries. You don't build a balcony to protect us in our neighbor's territory, and then you start building a balcony to protect the balcony, which is the logic of some of the extremists in our midst. So Gaza, occupied, West Bank, security nightmare, Jordan, Egypt, UAE, all of them diluting and basically withdrawing from the agreements. Saudi normalization and regional integration goes into the graveyard of missed opportunities on the one hand, and then perhaps even triggering the wrath of the 2 billion Muslims by Judaizing Temple Mount and the Haram Sharif, violating Muslim rights. On the other hand, getting out of Gaza, bringing the hostages home, bringing in Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Morocco, 5 countries that committed to this task of taking over Gaza, preventing Hamas from coming back, funding the boots on the ground from Egypt and Jordan and others, funding from the UAE and Saudi Arabia for Gaza reconstruction, the Arabs helping the Palestinian Authority reform, and serving as its crutches initially, on which it walks in the West Bank and in Gaza until it matures and can be rejuvenated and take over on its own, and then also serve as a partner for negotiations with us, all while getting into a regional coalition with Saudi Arabia and others to block Iran's meddling, violent meddling in the region. That's the other side of the equation. And they are 180% apart. And it was never the case that the choice was ours. Everybody is ready, and the choice is ours. So we need a change in Jerusalem, and the sooner it comes, the sooner a very promising chapter is going to be opened for our country.
Okay, well, I totally endorse your analysis and your vision, and we at Canadian Friends of Peace now want to do whatever we can to support that. Nimrod, well, first of all, I'll thank Reuven for being a great moderator. Thank you so much, Reuven. And Nimrod, you have brought so much clarity and depth to this to the many complex issues that we're facing. This has been a very timely talk. We are on tenterhooks as other Israelis and you, I'm sure, about the next steps in the ceasefire and the return of the hostages. We rejoice with those who have returned. And thank you so much, Nimrod, for being with us. I'd like to have you back as soon as possible, because you have so much to tell us. And I thank the audience for being with us. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions, and I hope you'll join us for our an upcoming webinar. And shalom lehitraot.
Shalom and good night from Ra'anana.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was excellent. Bye.
Bye now.
Bye, Gabriella.
Goodbye, Reuven. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. You were excellent. Thank you. And the guest was